Hello, everyone. I am so excited to have you join us today. And what are we talking about? Compliance. So, today's speaker is my very good friend, fellow Southerner, and my favorite Texan, Dr. Talcott. Y'all, his passion is really helping providers all across the country learn how to improve their life and their business. And part of the way that he does that is breaking compliance down to make it easier for you, because let's be honest, it's a necessary evil. But at the same time, when you run a compliant practice, you tend to run a more profitable practice. It gives you more peace of mind. It gives you the freedom to just relax. And I really can't think of anyone better than today's speaker to talk to y'all about that today. So, without further ado, Dr. Talcott, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you from one of my favorite people as well. So, and you introduced that so well. Everybody hates this topic. I don't have a passion for HIPAA. I hate HIPAA too. The problem is, if we're not, I do have a passion for improving patient outcome through and improving physician income. Those are two things I really like to do, and they're fun. But if you're not protected and you're not safe, you don't have an opportunity to do that. So for me to have the opportunity to help chiropractors build and develop big, successful practices, I have to make sure that they're safe so that we can do so. And in doing so, I like to move that on out to the profession because, quite frankly, the more success the government has at fining and collecting those fines from chiropractors, then the more they will audit. And it's just like, success breeds success in their mind. If everywhere they went, every practice they went into, they just hit a brick wall because the practices were in great shape and they were all compliant, they wouldn't make any money doing the audits and initiating penalties and fines, then they would stop doing this. But that's not the case, unfortunately. About 90% of practices are not even close to compliant. And this is not one of those things where you can say, oh, good, I'm in the majority, I'll be okay. The problem is if you're the one that gets hit and you've got the problem, you've got the problem. And you're the one who has to deal with it. So let's go through and do this today. I know I've done things before on compliance. We've went into a lot of detail on different parts of compliance. I want to first talk about what's going on. Every year I attend the cybersecurity symposium in Washington, D.C. Boy, is that a snooze of 3 days of listening to geeks talk about cybersecurity. But it's got the head of the Office of the Inspector General there usually. It's got the head of the Office of Civil Rights who enforces HIPAA. Or a very high representative. It's got the head or a very high representative of Health and Human Services that oversees the OCR, Homeland Security, all the people who are involved in enforcing HIPAA. And by going to that symposium, what I'm able to find out every year is a step larger than the people who just know something about the law and what we're kind of supposed to do. I find out what they're really going after, what really makes them angry, what they really fine people about, and kind of how far do you have to push some of these compliant issues for them to think you have met the standards. Because remember, the government and the law states the standards you have to meet. It doesn't tell you how to do it, ever. So what happens is they put a standard out there that you have to meet. Then if something goes wrong, your information is breached, you're turned in by a disgruntled ex-employee, you're turned in by a patient, you have a ransomware attack, a cyber attack, whatever happens that they end up investigating, they're going to look and they're going to ask you to prove to them how you met the standards. Then they're going to determine whether that was adequate or not. And if they determine it was not adequate, then they're going to fine you at that point. So let's kind of look at what they're saying and doing and then extrapolate that into an overall HIPAA program, and maybe we can get some kind of feel for what's going on out there in the world. So one good thing, there's a new attitude in Washington, D.C. because Trump does not like regulation, but Trump knows this area has to be regulated because this has gone all the way to a national security issue. So here's what he has sort of told everybody. He has said, if a doctor can show that they have taken documented steps to meet every one of the standards within HIPAA and they still have an issue or a problem occur, then you are to assist them rather than fine them. Now, that's good news because we've never had anything like that before. However, there's another shoe. The other shoe is, it also states, if they have missed meeting even one of those standards, however, have no mercy. So what they're saying is, people have not been paying attention. They've not been trying to meet the standards. If that continues, you're going to be hit hard, even if it's just in one small area. But the good news is, for once I can say, if we have done something to make sure that you hit all of the areas with a legitimate, documented approach to meet that standard, there's a very good chance that you at least won't get fined if you have a problem. Now, it still may be a big problem, and maybe a big problem for your patients as well with their data, but here are some of the latest things from Washington, D.C. cybersecurity. Let's look at what 2019 brings. Right now, the biggest risk out there is a thing called ransomware. This now accounts for 85% of all attacks on healthcare information. This has been on the rise since May of 2017. Let me explain to you with ransomware. When you get hit by ransomware, you come in and your computers are shut down. There's nothing there but a sign on the computer that says, we have your data. If you want your data back, you will send us X number of dollars, usually in Bitcoin, and they tell you they'll give you instructions how to supply Bitcoin. You say you got 4 hours or 8 hours to pay whatever it is, 25 grand. And if you don't do that, you got another 4 or 8 hours to pay 50 grand. And if you don't do that, then we're never giving you your data back. We're going to release it on the black market, the dark web, the internet for the criminals, you might say. We're going to, and if it's called weaponized ransomware, the little worm, the virus they put into your computer to make all of this happen, well, it can also destroy your computer and your hard drive. So this is a very bad thing, because that's not the bad problem. The bad problem is this is also a HIPAA violation. Because if you had a HIPAA program in place and were following appropriate policies, you couldn't be attacked by ransomware. Therefore, you have to report yourself to the Internet Crimes Division and to HIPAA, which is the OCR, Office of Civil Rights. If you don't and they find out, I don't even want to know you anymore, I won't even be your friend of what they do to you. But you'll end up doing it because anybody helping you restore your data will tell you you have to do that. Now you're going to face potential fines from the government. That's not the bad news. The bad news is you also typically have to monitor the credit of every individual breached in that attack for 1 year at your expense. That's about $10 per month per patient. The attack that happened in Kentucky, 5,000 chiropractor had 5,000 patients attacked, or the data stolen. Let's see, that would be $50,000 a month if that became part of the problem, part of the penalty, you might say. This is a big, big problem, and in just a minute, I'm going to show you a video of a woman I interviewed in the Pennsylvania mountains with a very small practice chiropractor who got hit by ransomware and what she went through, but not quite yet. First, I'm going to tell you this. The average cost now on a healthcare attack has gone to approximately $400 per individual attacked. So if you have 300 patients breached, you're looking at a lot of money, around 40 grand usually. I have termed ransomware as the new chiropractic $100,000 problem, because most people, it ends up costing them about $100,000 to fix the problem and do all the things that you have to do. Now, because it's such a big deal, I have been trying for a long time to get somebody who's been attacked, because I get the calls all the time from people who are attacked. I got one last week from a friend of mine in Dallas, where I live. When I get the calls, we have to deal with the problem where it lies. It's usually too late to prevent a HIPAA fine, because the problem would not have happened if they were HIPAA compliant. But we do have to deal with the ransomware attack as well. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to prevent them in the future, et cetera, et cetera. Most people don't want to talk about that. These are federal problems. These are federal investigations. But I found a chiropractor who
Ty, we've lost audio. Everyone, if you'll just hold on one moment. If y'all will watch this quick video clip while we try to reconnect Dr. Talcott.
Okay. Well, Dr. Levitt, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your experience, kind of some of the things you've been through, how long you've been going through them, and some of the hassles that come up when this kind of a ransomware attack hits.
Okay. As Ty said, my name is Dr. Kathleen Leday, and I am a chiropractor up in the Pocono Mountains. And we never thought that we would ever have been in this situation. I have a small practice up in the mountains. And in March of this year, we came in and we had one of those messages on our computer. And it had, all of your files are encrypted. And if you want those back, then you need to contact us via an email. We will tell you how you need to purchase Bitcoins. And I never knew what a Bitcoin was. And it would depend upon how much money it would cost us depending upon how quickly I responded. My husband is in IT, and I called him and we were freaking out and didn't know what was happening, didn't even know that it was a ransomware attack at that point. He told us to shut down all of our computers. That took us about a week of not having any computers, no schedule, no files to go back on. So that was just the beginning. Then we ended up having to go, we had to report it to the internal Internet Crime Complaint Center. Never even knew that we had that. We ended up having to go through a forensic report. And as Ty had said, going through the forensic report, for us, they determined that they did get in through our remote access port. We had shut that down to make sure that there was going to be no other breaches. But it took about a month and a half for them to determine that, yes, there was a potential of exposure of our PHI. But because it was a potential of exposure, we now needed to make sure that we contacted Health and Human Services. We also needed to figure out how many of our files were encrypted, how many of our files were potentially exposed. Ours was about 530. Anything above 500, you have to report to your local community. So then we had to put a legal public notice in our local newspaper. We being able to contact all of our patients, figuring out how many patients, again, were affected. That was a lengthy process because then we had to go and we had to do reports, we had to make Excel sheets, we needed to send it all over to them. Once we ended up going through and reporting it, then Health and Human Services had contacted me, verified all of the information. Now the investigation started. So about 6 weeks later, we ended up getting a letter explaining that we were under investigation and there was 24 questions that we needed to go through and answer. A lot of the stuff that Ty's going to be going over today is what they were asking us, what a risk analysis, a disaster plan. Not only is it the risk analysis, but how often are you doing a risk analysis, your risk management plan. Audit logs, can you determine any of your staff when they log on, when they go off, do they delete anything? So this was beyond what I ever thought I would have ever be experiencing. But once we've done that, we handed over, it was about 9 pages of information of me answering the questions. Then we had gotten back a letter stating that the one thing that they were concerned about is that I didn't have a risk analysis. Now, just like you, I would think that we do everything informally. I have a small practice. I only have 2 employees and myself. So everything in our practice is informal. We needed to have formal written policies that we can prove to them what we have done. Now, Malware, we had Windows Defender, but we did not realize that the malware, you had to bump it up to the premium plan because that also goes through and checks for ransomware. So we've done that. So we had to prove to them everything that we have been doing to prevent from this happening again. It is December. I'm still going through this, and when they were telling me that I had about 30 days to contact them and tell them what my risk analysis plan is going to be, I kind of freaked out because it's like they sent me all the information. When you sit down and you read it, it's so vague. You have no clue as to what they want, and that's why all of a sudden the PCA had sent me an email stating about the webinar that Ty had. So I went on that, and then I have personally purchased his silver program because we don't have the time to sit down and create our whole HIPAA manual and all of our risk analysis by January. So I'm working with Ty and Tiffany to create that. But it is extremely nerve-wracking, and we still don't know what the results are going to be. But if I tell you anything, I was one of those who said, yeah, I have my HIPAA manual, but it hasn't been updated. Let me tell you, now every single day we go in our office and we're looking around for potential things that the personal health information can get out. It's not only electronic, but it is paper. A lot of extra hours beyond what I'm already doing with treating my patients. So if you think that just because you have a data breach, it's over and done with after you contact all your patients, that was just the beginning. And it's the investigation that you really have to be worrying about. And it's like looking at every single thing in your practice to determine whether or not you're HIPAA compliant. And you have to have not only the risk analysis, but you have to do that all the time. You have to prove that you're training your training your staff on the HIPAA regulations. So for me, this has been a godsend to be able to come and to take Ty's course. And then also, again, for me, I needed to purchase one of the programs just because we're getting worn out. We don't want to have to sit down and spend hours upon hours deciphering what the government wants you to have, but yet really doesn't tell you how to go about.
Well, hopefully we got that little technology problem taken care of and we're in great shape now. I will tell you that relative to this ransomware attack, at the time I inherited her problem in her case, she'd been doing this almost a year, fighting with the government and fighting with these problems, and they'd already decided they were going to fine her, but they hadn't decided on an amount. And they had demands out to her of what she had to turn into them. Now, the good news I can tell you is everything I'm going to be teaching you later today, or that you will see if you find me live somewhere speaking for the 38 state associations and 5 colleges that I presently speak for all over the country, the information that I took and applied to her situation and created a go-forward plan. We submitted that to the government, and the outcome was the exact programs that we build for people when we're building programs from the scratch. We did that exact program, submitted it to the government, and they not only gave it a thumbs up, they closed the case and didn't even fine her. They reversed. I've never seen that happen before. Not saying I can get you out of trouble like that if you get in trouble. I'm just saying that was a good thumbs up, that they felt that our stuff met the criteria of meeting their standards. So that was very, very positive.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the technical issues that we're having connecting Dr. Talcott. Please hold on just 1 second while we reconnect them.
I hope I'm back on again now. I don't know what is going on with technology here, but we will continue. Okay, perfect. So they will file patients' tax returns, and if that patient has a refund coming, they end up getting the patient's refund. Then the patient can never get those taxes again because they won't reissue them. It takes about 2 years to establish a new identity with the government to be able to continue with that. And it's just kind of craziness. The other thing they do is they create fake insurance cards. And then people get care on these insurance cards. They come in from overseas or different things happen, and they end up getting care on the individual's group insurance information that was stolen within this process. They were talking about a case where a drug-addicted mother gave birth to a drug-addicted baby in the hospital. They were using the identity and the group insurance card of a totally different individual that was not them, of one of these fake ones we're talking about. They then ended up sending in social services because they expected an environment that was unsafe for the baby. They discharged the mother and the baby to go home. Social services follows that day to follow up on the situation, but they end up going to the address of the actual group policy holder. Once they go to the address of that group policy holder, they show up, and that woman just happened to have had a new baby also, and they took her baby away. Now, can you imagine the nightmare of that mother having her baby taken away? It took them about 2 days to sort it out and realize they had the wrong person, and to do blood tests and all that kind of stuff that they did, and determine that person was in fact telling the truth when they were saying they had the wrong baby. So these things can get to be quite bad. Another thing that's a really bad situation are complaints against you. Over the years, these complaints have increased as people have become more cognizant of the fact that their information can get stolen and they can have problems. They started to complain against people who they think are doing something wrong with their information. Maybe they've been through identity theft, had their tax returns stolen. The last 14 live presentations I've done, of the last 14, 13 of those presentations, there was a doctor, one or more in the room, that had had their tax identification stolen and their tax refund stolen. This is happening all over the place. This is not something like it used to be. Maybe I haven't heard much from HIPAA. It won't be too big a deal. I get calls every week from people who are in trouble. Now, I'd rather help you prevent the problem. We're the profession of prevention. It's a lot better to prevent this stuff. Sometimes I can get you out of trouble. Sometimes I can't. And so that's not my expertise. My expertise is prevention, just like yours is as a chiropractor treating your patients. And I can tell you that complaints against you are huge. Patients complain. Other doctors find out what you're doing or not doing and complain. One of the big ones now are ex-employees complaining against doctors. They go to work in another health facility where they're doing it right, and they emphasize it, and they realize you were doing it wrong, and they're mad at you. Now you can see here, between 2013 and 2016, how much the complaints have increased. They've doubled over that time. Well, the government's very slow at getting their data out. I can tell you this. If you go back to 2008, it was only 7,000 complaints a year. And I can also tell you that at the cybersecurity symposium, they said for 2018 that as of October of 2018, they'd already passed 24,000 complaints and anticipated over 30,000 complaints. That's up threefold. I've never had a problem with HIPAA before. We got 3 times as many people complaining against you at this point. I already covered that one. Now here's the deal. It doesn't matter how your attention gets brought to the government. You know, if you have a theft of a device, or you're turned in by somebody, or it's a complaint, or a whistleblower, or you have a ransomware attack, the problem is you're going to be subject to investigation at that time. And very quickly, the investigations usually turn from whatever the suspected offense is. Well, they come in and they start asking you to prove, well, what did you do for your HIPAA manual? What have you compliance plan where your risk analysis says that if this occurs, you know what you're going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And very quickly, the investigation turns into an investigation of whether you are compliant versus whatever the offense was. I will also tell you that they said at the HIPAA Symposium that what kind of practices are in trouble, what kind of practices are in the site of ransomware attacks, what kind of practices are having problems. Well, small, medium, and large. Size does not matter. In fact, small can be a gateway to bigger, and the criminals have figured that out, and now they're attacking small places where they make their way into bigger. And a good example is an MD office that's affiliated with a hospital. Sometimes they can get into the MD's computer, and then they end up in the hospital computer as well. Now, some of the things that the government specifically said, and some of these we'll get a chance to talk just a little bit about today, but some of the things that they said at the last symposium, to date, there have been over 2,000 breaches that included over 500 individuals. There have been breaches as big as 80 million people. Anthem Insurance was breached. Blue Cross PERMA was 11 million people. But anytime it's over 500 people, if you have 500 patients involved in a breach, then like the woman on the video that you saw had 530, then you have to notify the public. You have to notify the government. You have to contact each of your patients. There's all these things you have to do. There have been almost 2,300 of those types of breaches reported to the government. This doesn't include the ones that never get reported. These are reported breaches. Now, when you go to the breaches of under 500, 10 patients breached, 1 patient breached, 20 patients breached, there have been 347,000 of those breaches reported to the government, impacting 262 million people. This is not something that might happen one day. This is going on all the time. Now, a lot of those people have been breached repeatedly because, as an example, if you were one of the 80 million in Anthem breach, then if you were in a hospital that was breached, you could have been breached again, and you might have been in a dentist office that got breached. You've been breached 3 times because obviously there's only 350 million people in the United States, so 262 means everybody's been hit practically. It's not quite like that, but there are multiple, and when someone gets hit multiple times, if there's a consequence to it, they get really funny about their data. They stated over and over, there is no silver bullet to solve these problems. It revolves around your people and processes. This is why a typical HIPAA manual in a chiropractic office is going to be somewhere around 300 to 500 pages long. You're going to have about 100 pages of just policies. It takes about 100 pages to cover just the required policies. Then you've got your risk analysis, your contingency plans, all these things that you have to write up and have done correctly. Last year, they did 200 random audits. They were mainly looking for what are called BAA audits. These are business associate agreements. This is an omnibus rule of 2013 required by law to update laws of HIPAA. If you're not doing these things, they will nail you to the wall. And BAA agreements, you must have one in place with everybody who stores your electronic patient health information or transmits.
Hold on, everyone, while we reconnect Dr. Talcott.
Wow, that's getting tiresome, huh? I really apologize for the technology problems, but we'll try to keep going here. Okay, so what are they looking at on these random audits? They're doing BAA agreements. You have to have a business associate agreement in place with any entity or individual that stores your electronic patient health information, transmits your patient health electronic information, or whom you've given a passcode to access that information. You have to, they did these random audits relative to a risk analysis. Washington, D.C. has stated over and over, if you don't have a risk analysis with recent ICERs, you have no HIPAA program at all. You have met none of the standards. Even if you have met some of the other standards, they consider you to be a zero. And that will be a $50,000 minimum fine called a willful neglect fine. You also have to have your patient notification, your notice of patient privacy policy has to be given to every new patient. It has to be in a conspicuous location in your office displayed, and you have to get a signed acknowledgement from the patient that they received it. These are just some of the things. Now, my buddy was one of the people turned in or reported by a patient. He's right down the street from me. I went to see him. I get adjusted once in a while. I'm a chiropractor. Once in a while, I get home long enough to get an adjustment. I walked in the door. I said, how you doing with your HIPAA program? Because I'd helped him install a HIPAA program. He said, I'm doing great. I said, that's the weirdest response I've ever heard to HIPAA. He said, well, they came. Well, when somebody tells me that they came, that usually means that I get a phone call of panic. And I didn't get a phone call from him. Kind of insulted me. Here's my friend who I helped install their HIPAA program. He didn't even call me. I said, what happened? What did they want? He said, well, they came in and they said they were investigating a patient complaint. I said, did they come in with their badges and their guns? He said, yes, they did. I said, did they have the guns drawn? He said, no, they didn't. I said, that's a good sign. What did they want? He said, well, they wanted to see, they were investigating a patient complaint. They wanted to see a copy of my notice of patient privacy policy, a copy of the signed acknowledgement from this patient that they had received the notice, where I had the notices displayed in the office, my most current version of my risk analysis, and my most current ICER. He said, Ty, before I took your seminar and learned about this stuff, I wouldn't even have known what one of those things was, much less had it. As it was, I was able to present to them what they were asking for, and they were gone within 15 minutes. He said they continued to read through some documents, and they came to a place where they said, hey, you know what? This document, the patient signed it. It specifically states what you're saying, what you contend. It's completely the opposite of what the patient stated. Case is closed. That's the way you want to survive a HIPAA investigation. So they're serious about this stuff, and they are investigating these things. Now, I will also tell you that at the symposium, they went over the most reoccurring issues that come up that make them crazy and make them fine people. So these are a lot of the things that make them fine people. Number one are those business associate agreements I was talking about that put you at risk if you don't have them in place, and people frequently do not have them in place. This is a real problem. Risk analysis not done in current, as I just mentioned, or having recent ICERs. That stands for Information System Activity Review. I will tell you this. The Office of the Civil Rights stated, the head of the office says, we've done everything we can to warn people about this and educate doctors relative to having risk analysis and information system activity reviews, and we are fed up. We are not tolerant when we investigate. If they don't have a risk analysis, it's over, it's done. They're not tolerating that. So I'm just telling you, this is what they just said just a few months ago. Failure to encrypt data at rest on devices is a real problem. Lack of transmission security is a problem. Here's a big one. There are about 12 audits, reviews, or evaluations that you have to do and document you did them on an annual or more frequent basis, or your HIPAA program is not current. There are things you have to keep up and do. You have to do your risk analysis at least once a year. You have to do ICERs on a frequent basis. You have to do a sit-down contingency emergency mode plan. You have to sit down with your staff once a year, go around the table, say what you would do in the event of a tornado or whatever to protect information. You have to document you've done all these things. There's about a dozen of them. And they're saying, we don't find that people are doing their internal audits and their reviews appropriately. So they know they're not being done, so they know that they can come in, and in most offices they can find people, and this encourages them. They're saying patches are not being done currently and kept up on computers, that there's inadequate backup, and that people don't have that contingency plan that I briefly mentioned that includes emergency mode operation and data recovery in the event of emergency. Folks, this is scary stuff, and it's a big deal. There's a lot to do to get this under control, but it can be done. You have to remember, there are times in history where there's a change that takes place and history never moves backwards. The invention of electricity, the Industrial Revolution. Well, we lived through one, folks. It's called the Internet. And with the Internet came cyber attacks. This is now a way of life forever. We either get on top of this stuff, get compliant with it, or eventually it's going to bury us. We're either going to get trapped by a ransomware attack, or we're going to get hit by something that shuts us down, or we're going to get fined by the government for not doing things right, or whatever it is. This is the new world. It will take some time and some effort to get on the other side of this wave. Once you do, it's like getting your license. You know, I mean, once you got it, yeah, it was a pain to get it, but you got it, and now you can kind of rest. Well, if you do this and do it right and set up your ongoing checks and balances correctly, you'll get to a point where you can do this right. And then it'll be pretty easy at that point. But it's a transition for most people. It's a fairly major one. Hard to do on your own. There's about 1,400 pages of HIPAA law, about 168 pages of omnibus rules, about 5 government websites to go through and try to interpret. And from that, you will eventually figure out what the government wants you to do. Then you have to go through the process of deciding how you're going to prove you've met those standards and you've done what they want. So it is a big process. It's doable, but it is a big process to get through. Now, one of the things I'm going to do very quickly here today, I'm going to run through the table of contents of a typical HIPAA manual, a good HIPAA manual, because I want to give you an idea of the breadth of this law and some of the things that the government's been saying, because this is after all, a presentation about updates from the government. You need to have a section, figure it this way, every time you see a black line of print, you've got a tab in a manual. And behind that tab, you've got a certain amount of documents. And that's going to show you how this manual grows to be a thick, fat manual very quickly. You need a section for compliance officer. The compliance officer must have a written job description. There must be a notification in the manual that states who your compliance officer and secondary compliance officers are with their private phone numbers and their private addresses, a way to contact them that is not office numbers, phone numbers, etc. You have to have a policy and a procedure for having a compliance officer, and you have to have the 7-page
Everyone stand by. I am so sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't know what's going on, but this is just a fact of life, I guess. The presentation is going to go even faster because we've got to get through with the time that we've got, and I apologize for it being even more rushed. Okay, in that manual, you need a copy of your Notice of Patient Privacy policy and the one that you actually are using and distributing to patients. You need the latest from the Washington D.C. cybersecurity. What they're saying, they're looking into changing that acknowledgement. So you got to keep your ear to the grindstone here. Wait a minute, no, what was it? No, you got to keep your ear to the door. I mean, you got to hear what's going on and know what's going on because it keeps changing. Any forms that you use, you have to keep forms for a minimum of 6 years. So you change or alter a form, you have to keep a copy of the old form with a retirement date, a copy of the new form with an engagement date. You have to be able to go back and prove what you were doing for your HIPAA program at any time over the past 6 years. These are HIPAA documents we're talking about. They're saying that there's problems with timely access to records, that people are not allowing patients access to their record. They're trying to say to patients, well, you can't get to your records because you owe me a bill, and they're overcharging people. There are guidelines for charges, or guidelines, there are maximums for charging. All of this is in your HIPAA manual when you create it properly. All those things are outlined under the government, and people are messing this up all the time. We have people not following the fax procedures. I had a case they discussed in Washington, D.C., where a patient gave a fax number on their file, but then later they signed an authorization to release information to a fax number that was different. When they released the information, they went to their file number, not the authorization number. They ended up faxing this information to the patient's employer instead of the patient where they wanted it to go, and it had all of their information about HIV and STDs and mental illness. That was a $350,000 lawsuit settlement on that, including all the government fines and stuff. You're required to have an accounting log that accounts for everywhere that you send your patient information out of your office. Anywhere it goes out of your office, you have to log where it went, who it went to, what it was about, why it was sent, what was sent, except insurance forms. They're asking the question now, is it really necessary for everything? And maybe we could exempt some things. Well, you need to be plugged in somewhere that you're getting this information so that you know. Employee confidentiality statements. Most of you are good when you hire a new employee. You have them sign a confidentiality before they see any information. But there's more to it than that. When you hire a new employee, you must give them a full HIPAA training within 45 days of hiring them. You have to go through your whole dog and pony show again, unless you have somebody helping you with it or supply it for you. You have to do this. If a patient has a problem and they complain and they find out that an employee was in the information and did not have that training within 45 days, you have an automatic problem. That's a major, major problem. We talked some about business associate confidentiality. That's your business associate agreements. These are being enforced highly. Some of the free scheduling apps that you all use, you have to have a BAA agreement with them. They are handling your data, transmitting your data, or have access to your data, and the government specifically brought those up at the symposium as being a real hot spot of problems. You're required annually to do an in-service full training for your entire staff. I can tell you that this includes the privacy and security rules, the two parts of HIPAA, and they have stated they don't even think once a year is enough. They think it needs to be at least twice a year, although it's not in the law. You can still get by with once a year probably. But they are saying healthcare has the highest insider attack rate and highest insider error rate. Every single breach that occurs has a human element to it, and this is a problem. What do they look for when there's an incident? What happened? In other words, who did what or who did not do what? How did you respond? What have you done to prevent it in the future? Those are all people issues. The first three big things they look at. Then they look at whether you were priorly compliant or not. So I'm just telling you that they're looking at your people. You have to issue a security reminder to your workforce on a monthly basis that reminds them of things that are current in cybersecurity. If you don't have someone doing that for you, you've got to do it yourself. The law says you must issue periodic security reminders to your workforce. Nobody knew what that meant until about 2 years ago at a cybersecurity symposium when they stated they have never looked at a physician office that they felt was adequately educated and adequately being reminded of security unless they were issuing at least monthly. So now we know from that symposium what they look for and what they tend to enforce. You have to do a physical plant audit. This is what most people think HIPAA is when they don't understand HIPAA. This is where you go through and make sure people can't see your computer screens and your charts aren't laying around and those type of things. But you have to do that audit annually, and you have to document that audit. You need an audit tool. You have to create one. Unless someone's supplying you one, you have to create one and make this stuff up. And I'm telling you, they're fed up with mobile devices and laptops and flash drives. Laptop is the most often stolen device. Now, a lot of people ask about sending information email, by the way. And for those who ask about that, I can tell you that they changed their mind on that. At one point, they said you could only send email to patients and other places, information, email, when it was encrypted. They've changed that. If you have the patient's permission, you can now send email unencrypted to a patient or transfer a patient's records from one place to another. Most people are just putting that in their initial sign-up information when patients come in now, getting permission from them. The risk analysis, I just can't overemphasize risk analysis and ICERs. ICERs are about doing mainly audit logs, and I don't have time to explain audit logs today, but it's mainly about doing audit logs and dealing with those. You're required to do an A to Z HIPAA program every year. That's a documented audit tool that goes through and makes sure all of your stuff, all of your different areas are working and function, don't need to be updated. Again, policies and procedures, there's about 100 pages for most offices, and that required contingency plan, again, is where you're looking at how do you recover data if your office burns down or a tornado knocks everything down. And I'm trying to go fast because I'm afraid I'm going to get cut off on this thing somehow and not be able to get back on, so I'm trying to really rock through this thing. Here is a quick look at a list of the policies. I told you about 100 pages. These are the policies that you have to author, what you do about all these different areas, and how you make sure that these areas are protected under HIPAA. And this is just plain required that you do this. So what I want to do at this point is I want to take a few minutes and answer some of the questions that have come in. And I'm not positive there's a way to do this, but in the event that I don't get to all the questions and I can answer them later by email, I certainly will do that. Well, here's one about emailing patients their medical records and payment receipts and that type of thing. And again, you can email without it being, if you have encrypted email, if you have an EHR, electronic medical records system, that should have to have encrypted email capability. If you don't know how to
Everyone stand by.
Okay, we'll try again and keep on going. So another question, does ransomware go after the data that's stored in the cloud or stored on a house server or an in-office server? There's a thing called weaponized ransomware. And weaponized ransomware, what they do, they end up planting a virus or a bug in your hard drive, and that thing is trained to work its way backwards into your backup data. So if there's an opportunity and enough time allowed on these bugs, they are trained to work their way backwards. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. I can tell you this, that the government stated at the cybersecurity symposium that the 3 largest breaches in history would have been prevented had people been doing their ICERs, their audit logs, and found these viruses planted in the hard drives prior to them activating it for the ransomware. In other words, if they put a bug in your system today, they don't attack you today with ransom. They attack you with the ransomware, but they don't make their demands today. They might leave it in there for weeks or months. They even have ways to extract your data without you knowing it on an ongoing basis and not ever attack you with the ransomware approach. They're very sophisticated. And doing your ICERs, your Information System Activity Reviews, properly, and again, I don't have time to teach that today, but doing those properly, that's what finds these things hopefully before they become a major problem. So that is an area. The question is, did the doctor that spoke on the video have firewall in place at the time of the cyber attack? Yeah, her husband's actually in IT, and they had all of that stuff in place. That attack, they came in through an outside portal, and she had to have forensic people come in and attack her computers to find out where they came in and what they actually got and all of that kind of stuff. And it's very expensive, very cumbersome process to have to do that. Are there any HIPAA compliant emailing services of x-rays or files? I would be concerned about using an outside service to do emailing. I would instead find out from your EHR provider how to send it encrypted, or have an IT person help you and find out how to send encrypted email, what you need to put in place on your computer. If you use an outside service, just remember, you have to have a BAA agreement in place with them. Do not let them have, alter, send, transmit, or have your data without a BAA agreement, or if they do anything wrong, you're the one that's going to be blamed. You're the one at risk. Okay, I think that got the main questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of segue into the next part of this. What I want to do is I want to tell you about putting together a HIPAA program. The way we're supposed to do it, as I mentioned, is we're supposed to read the law. You've heard, ignorance of the law is no excuse. We all have heard that before. We kind of know what that means, and that's where we're at. So you're supposed to read the law. Tied into the HIPAA law is the high-tech law and also breach notification law. So there's several that crunch up together. Now, there's another area that is a massive problem, and that's the Office of the Inspector General. This has nothing to do with HIPAA. OIG, Office of Inspector General, Medicare. Since 2010, if you treat even one Medicare or Medicare eligible patient per year, you must have an OIG compliance program in place as of 2010. Right now, the OIG 1 year ago came out and said publicly they were out to take back 82% of all money paid to chiropractors under Medicare. We didn't know what that meant. We do now. They have hired outside agencies to do audits. The first audits coming back against chiropractors have come in. They're horrible. The only protection I know to help you is to have your OIG program in place and up to date. I can tell you this. They seem to be on a real path because they have hired outside agencies to do these audits, and they're letting them keep 25% of all the money they recoup or get through fines and penalties. Now, why am I bringing it up in a HIPAA program? Because under the OIG program, that compliance program, one of the requirements is that you have a HIPAA program. You have to attest to the fact that, yes, in fact, I have a HIPAA program in place. And then if they investigate and you don't, you got double trouble. So we've got HIPAA, high-tech, OIG, breach notification. These things all tie together. Even though they're in separate areas, they also overlap. So once you read all of that and do all of that, then you have to author the policies and the approaches that you're going to use, again, to document to the government you've done these things. Think about it like this. You have to build, one way or another, you have to build a defensible position to defend yourself against the government. And that's the way this thing is stacked. That's just the way it is. So that's the way we're supposed to do it. Again, ignorance is no excuse. Now, the only other ways I know to do this are to have somebody help you. And so I'm going to take a couple minutes and tell you what I do to help people. I would rather help you build on the front end than I would to try to get you out of trouble on the back end. I'm not an attorney, and I don't have the ability to go in and change the government. All I can do is go in and try. The slide came up that said I'm scheduled to end in 5 minutes, but my slides went away. Let me see if I can get my slides back. There we go. Okay. So I know I loaded you with a lot of stuff over the hour. It's a lot of things. You can do it. You can do it on your own. I help people do it on their own, but I need you to categorize yourself. Are you a do-it-yourselfer? That means a great starter and a great finisher. You start something, you don't procrastinate. then my bronze solution might be something of interest to you. This is a solution we just call it the sort of the do-it-yourselfer kit. And it's a kit that has templates and samples and training, and it's online. It's also on disk, and it's also on flash drive, so you can do it any way you want to do it. That's easy. But it walks you through the process, tells you what to do step by step until we actually help you author that 300 to 500 page manual and get the things in place that are customized to your office. It has to have your office staff, your equipment, your securities in place. There is no set thing you can buy, a 500-page book. I know people did this, buy some kind of a pre-written, pre-prepared something and stick it on a shelf. As soon as they come in, they're going to say, where's your HIPAA program? You're going to point to it. They're going to look at it and say, but you didn't do anything in the manual, and now you're in what's called willful neglect because you knew what you needed to do. It's in the manual, but you didn't do it. This is only the solution for the person who's a follow-through person. Otherwise, you will start it, you will not finish it. Yes, it does not take hundreds of hours like it does to create one from your own and go through the process, but it still takes, it's designed for a CA, and it still takes a CA about 15 hours. That's what we hear from the field, about 15 to 20 hours. The pricing on it, typical retail is $549, but for y'all, I am from South, it'll be $397, and that will include a free OIG compliance program. Why? Because this is a crisis. This could turn into a really, really big thing, and so we're giving that away free with any HIPAA purchase at any level. I want you as safe as possible under this present scenarios, and I'm glad to give you more information on this as well. Use those phone numbers, use those email addresses. If you need to get to me to talk about a specific thing in your office that you're concerned about or you're not sure what you should do, use the email address that's my name with a dot in it, okay, ty.talcott@gmail.com. I answer all my emails before I go to bed every night. Now, it may only be to say, hey, I got your email, I'm working on it tomorrow, but you will not be ignored. I will be in touch with you. I also want to give you my cell phone number, 469-371-8804, 469-371-8804. Now, if you're like most of the world, it's just nicer if somebody does this for you. That's our silver solution. The silver solution, we ask you a ton of questions. It's a ton. You answer those questions. Now, we know as much about your office as you know about your office for the purpose of creating your HIPAA program. We create it. We send it to you in both hard copy, so you get that 300 to 500 to 600 to 700 page copy, and the electronic file it was printed from. Doing it that way, you can then update stuff in the future. Those reviews, evaluations I was talking about in the future, you can do it on the electronic file, print just the pages that are involved, retire the old pages, put the new pages in place, and it's rock and roll time. The cost of that is 6 payments of $299. And if you want information on that, you can certainly contact us through these means, and we will be glad to send you an order form or more information. Do it however you need to, and that'll be wonderful. We also have a service where we come on site, deliver that silver package, and train your compliance officer directly. That's overkill for most offices, but if you have one person that's going to be training a lot of people, it definitely makes sense. And again, here's my cell phone number. Listen, I appreciate your time. It's all we have in life is our time. I know you probably think I cost you some time now, but actually I'm trying to keep you from doing time. So thank you for having me on today. I look forward to coming back in the future, and maybe we can take some of these items in depth and actually give some training on some how-to to go along with this. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talcott. Just a reminder, next week we have Dr. Mark Santa on our webinar series talking about how to have a multidisciplinary practice the right way. There's a lot of rules and regulations when it comes to having a multidisciplinary practice, so make sure that you register for that. It's always a popular one. that we host every single year. The following week, we're going to be talking about May is Posture Month with Mr. Posture himself, Dr. Stephen Weininger. Again, make sure you register early, and then we'll be following up the following week to talk about the 10 biggest factors that impact the value of your chiropractic practice. Lots of great, exciting webinars coming up in the future, so check our website out at ChiroHealthUSA.com/webinars and make sure that you register early. Register for them all. Ladies and gentlemen, you have an amazing rest of your day and a fabulous week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye, everyone. Ty?